Welcome to episode 18 of the DevDecoder podcast. And Rebecca is smiling away as usual because she's delighted at having just got away with being very annoying.
And 18, so we're allowed to drink now. Can we have booze right here?
I don't think we count 18 in terms of episodes. I think it's more an annual thing, like, years since you were born. I don't think just listening to episode 18 is going to qualify our listeners for all kinds of adult-based entertainment.
Next episode, we're going to have a beer right here.
That's your dream, isn't it?
Yes.
Actually, this is quite a big episode today for many reasons. This is probably we're gonna have a little pause after this for a couple of weeks, whilst I recover from becoming less bionic. Many of our listeners probably don't realise, but of course, I am actually a robot.
No!
Yeah?
He's going to take over the world.
No, because I'm actually getting the titanium removed from my arm this week, so that'll put me out of action for a few weeks, but that'll give us an opportunity to have a bit of a revamp, ready for episode 19 and our adults version of the podcast.
This is our adult version.
Yeah, it's not about the content. It's more about how seriously we take it, I think.
No, nothing's going to change.
Absolutely not. But with that, I think we should probably get on to talking about something interesting for our listeners. So this week's more of a tech failures than a tech success week.
Isn't it always?
Well, no, I think we've had some really good announcements in the last few weeks, but this week it seems like all the big players are having stumbles. I mean, first of all, we've had Google+. They've finally announced that since 2011, when Google Plus was announced as a potential future competitor to Facebook, it's really just been a dud. And apparently they had a privacy breach in March, and they're now saying that they are closing Google Plus. I think, to be fair, most of the tech industry is going with what was Google Plus.
I don't know what it was.
It was Google's attempt at social networking and integrated for all of their platforms.
And it worked well, obviously.
Actually, it worked. In the sense of it did actually do what it said, and for example, to add comments onto YouTube, you had to have a Google Plus account and things like that. So they really did try and push it hard. But I think they've had what I think is probably a minor breach because they've not disclosed a huge amount about it. But from what they've said, it strikes me that if it had been more serious, they'd been required to disclose a bit more. But either way, they're trying to downplay Google Plus's importance, and they've effectively announced they're closing it, which saw Alphabet shares, Alphabet being the parent Google, dropped by over a percentage point. In the same time, Microsoft have got their October release of Windows, the fall preview, the fall release for their Windows 10. They've had to pull that because it was deleting people's files.
Oh, I did see that.
Did you see that one? Yeah. It's an easy mistake to make, but it's a fatal one when you're forcing out required updates. So they've paused the release of that, which is it's a pretty big story in the tech community. That some idiot's done a bit of code at Microsoft is probably in a lot of trouble around that one. And then Facebook, of course, had their big privacy breaches as well in the last week or so. So really, there's a lot of privacy-related stuff and data-related stuff coming out at the moment. It's really starting to show that the big players are struggling in this new environment of the cloud and control over data and what should and shouldn't be. I think it's a fascinating time for technology. It's also a frightening time in one sense to be developing software and technology because of the potential pitfalls and how easy it is to get caught up in some of this when you see the big players. But yeah, probably a tech failure week, I think.
No accounts are safe.
No, but it does bring into mind, just the importance of all of us to really be cognizant of what we're putting out there in the cloud, because I think a general good rule of thumb for humans is to remember that if you put it online, just assume it's public. Just assume it's getting out there. I think there's a lot of people that trust too much in security and privacy, and scandal after scandal after scandal has shown us that even when we think it's super secure, the Snowden leaks, all the rest of it have really shown us that if it's out there and it's in digital form, it's easy to intercept, it's easy to copy, and although there are ways of securing yourself and securing stuff, it's a lot less common for people to actually know how to do it correctly, and even when they think they know, they might be wrong. So, ultimately, I think it's a savvy point to people just to be a little bit cautious about what they put online. And really, if it's not on there, it can't be lost, it can't be stolen.
Do you remember years ago when all of the Yahoo accounts were hacked?
Yeah, well, there's loads of these. I mean, there's There's a website called Have I Been Pawned?
Oh, yeah, I think you mentioned this
I
before.
mentioned before. I got updated yet again this week of another breach. There was a big marketing firm in the US that had collected a huge amount of data on businesses and companies and directors and all the rest of it. And my email accounts, I've never given my information to that company. I've never handed it over, but my CEO related accounts, they were all exposed from that, and it came up my have I been pawned, because I have a notification on there to let me know if anything comes up. So it just shows that your data gets out there. People scrape it from all kinds of sources, whether it be from like websites, Twitter feeds, Facebook. Now in my case, I'm not particularly precious about that, but it does mean, for example, the amount of spam I get is just ridiculous. I get a huge amount of people emailing my accounts, and it's about having good spam filters and blocking stuff and unsubscribing. But ultimately, you've got to be a little bit pragmatic about, if it's online, it's getting out.
Rebecca's Back to the Podcast. It's not about animals this time.
No way. Oh my
I
word,
know.
we're actually going to have an interesting fact that's not
I wouldn't
animal-based.
say it was interesting.
Okay, I mean, this is supposed to be a tech podcast, but okay. Is it
I'm
going to be related
catering to everyone.
Is it going to be related to tech in any way, shape, or form? That's a no.
So in Minnesota...
You know where Minnesota is? It's actually in the US.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Thanks.
I wasn't sure you know, so I thought I'd clarify that.
I'm the one that brought it up in the last one. Okay. In Minnesota, there's a new mayor elected every 2 years. And they elect the mayor by pulling a name out of a hat.
There isn't a mayor of Minnesota. There's a governor of Minnesota. Do you mean there's a town in Minnesota?
No, it says mayor.
There's no mayor of Minnesota.
Oh, Dorset. Wait.
There you go.
Dorset, Minnesota. In Dorset, Minnesota.
Excellent. Yeah. Good start.
They pick a new mayor every 2 years.
Yeah.
And they do it by pulling a name out of a hat.
Okay.
Yeah. So in 2015, a 3-year-old was the mayor of Dorset.
So here's a good question, right? I can understand that. I mean, towns can have their own bylaws in the States. In fact, one of the things that's people forget that the United States is a collection, a federation of states, and each state has a lot of autonomy. And within each state, there's then actually cities and principalities and effectively city regions, etc. And those cities. And they non-exist in counties like we have over here. But in those counties, they have their own bylaws and rules, and they can collect their own taxes, and the city themselves can collect their own taxes. And they can govern themselves within quite a wide remit as long as it's democratic. And so it is absolutely believable that in that town they decided we'll just pull the hat out of the mayor. What I don't understand is that there doesn't appear to be any kind of constraint over what names go in the hat.
Do you want to know what his governing style was?
I suspect it had quite a lot to do with needing nappies changed.
Nope.
Don't know, what was his governance style?
Be nice and no poopy talk.
So I wasn't far off, was I? There was definitely nappy involvement.
I want to move there.
Except you do quite enjoy poopy talk, so it's not necessarily the best place for you. That was, without a doubt, an interesting and irrelevant fact.
So, I thought we'd talk about an event that's happening in October, and it's getting pretty close.
Let me guess. This is Rebecca. I'm thinking maybe Oktoberfest?
No.
Oh, okay.
I've never been to Oktoberfest.
It does sound like your place to live and eventually die.
I do like beer.
Mm-hmm. But it's not Oktoberfest. Okay, so another event happening in October, Halloween.
No.
Okay. So
Although I did try to dress up as a scary unicorn once.
a scary unicorn? Mm-hmm. That seems somewhat sacrilegious considering your genuine love of unicorns.
I just wanted to put a bit of blood on my face.
Oh, so basically you're just a unicorn with a bit of ketchup on your face.
Blood, actually.
But what is unicorn blood? Is it not just something sweet like cranberry juice?
Maybe.
Okay, so far I have two strikes. Events in October. Well, today, of course, is when we're recording this. This is actually Ugandan Independence Day.
It's not that one.
Okay, so that's 3 strikes. I'm out.
No, you can keep guessing. You can go ahead and keep guessing.
Legitimately, I'm out at this point.
You can't think of anything else?
No.
Nothing else.
What else? Well, Hack Manchester.
Hey! Woo!
I suspect Hack Manchester. Is that what we're going to talk about today?
No.
Oh.
I'm just kidding.
So we are, of course, headline sponsors for Hack Manchester again this year.
Yes.
And I'm hoping to be able to go along and judge it, as I've done in previous years.
We know what happened last time you were recovering, so...
It wasn't my finest hour, was it? No. This is the danger. Having announced to a room full of young people and Greater Manchester Police that, sorry about my judging, I am on drugs. It's probably not something I want to repeat.
I think you're underestimating young people. They were about 7.
Yeah, they were very young. Yeah, there was quite a lot of teenagers at the junior event as well. So there were teenagers there. There were a lot of primary school age children there as well. Yes, I do enjoy the junior event a lot. It's one of my favourite parts. They are so creative, and actually, it's one of the things that you really realise by doing the junior events as well, because I judge quite a lot of these competitions, so junior events, but also student events at universities, Great Uni Hack, Student Hack, and some of the MLH, so Major League Hackathons. I've been to some of them, but also the Hack Manchester, the adult competition, and Hack Leeds, of course, we did this year. And I think some of the first ones were on this podcast, weren't they? I think we went to...
Oh, I think it was Student Hack.
I think Student Hack
yeah.
were. And the thing that you really notice doing the junior ones compared to the adult ones is that when you're constrained by, I hate to say lack of ability, but a lack of coding and not a huge amount of experience in it, it really forces you to be more creative. It really forces you to come up with good ideas rather than just good technologies. And when you get to the adult competition, some of that goes, and you see the adults just trying to do something cool with tech, and try to use a cool piece of technology, but what they're actually doing isn't that creative or innovative or different. And I think we really do, sometimes we need to be a bit more childish about the way we, approach problems and just go, let's have a bit of fun with this and just throw something together. I think that's the beauty of Lego, isn't it? We don't need to make, it's more fun to be able to build a rocket spaceship out of Lego than it is to build a real car, out of sheet metal and the rest of it. I think sometimes we just need to experiment and create and just throw things together with what we have and what we can do, rather than worry about what we can't do. And young people are way better at doing that and saying, I can't do everything, but I can still do something amazing and creative and wonderful. So I am hoping to make it to the junior event, but it's only a week or so after my op, so we'll have to see. And I'm definitely trying to make the adult event. So.
But I just like the junior one because they're just always so excited.
Yeah.
And they tend to learn more. They tend to learn more than at the senior one, and some of them even produce better projects.
Yeah, we really do see that. I still, for some of my fondest hackathon memories, one of my absolute favourite hacks, I mean, I've got some great ones over the years that have really stuck in my mind, but one of my favourite hacks was from the junior event, where a young group did one for the co-op challenge, was to do with loneliness and combating loneliness. And they had a really crazy fun idea where they got co-op baskets, shopping baskets, and they added a little Arduino board to it and all the rest of it. And as shopping baskets walked past each other, they'd start talking to each other. So the shopping baskets would just start having a conversation. So the idea was, as you were going around and having a shopping, your shopping basket would say something cute or funny to one of the other shopping baskets walking past, as a way for them to start a conversation between people.
Talking.
And I thought this was just such a stunningly good idea. It really was. It's something you would never see in an adult coming up with, but it just, honestly, it's still one of those things that just gets me and goes, that's the perfect example of what I was just talking about. When somebody says, it's not about what we can do with technology, it's what can we do to really be creative and solve a genuine problem. And I thought, of all the things I've ever seen, in terms of meeting the mission brief, which was do something with technology to combat loneliness, what a stunningly good idea. And of course, Coop was sponsoring that particular challenge, and so they also even made it relevant because Coop could release these into their stores. I still think that's something I'd like to see. Oh,
that would be pretty cool.
Just walking around Tesco's or Co-op or one of the other supermarkets are available. Aldi, obviously. You notice I didn't say Waitrose, so you can pitch me at where I am in the class hierarchy in the United Kingdom.
Our prizes are going to probably be live next week.
We're going to be sticking them up online.
Yeah.
So probably at the time this is announced, we can probably announce them here as well. So for the young people, we're going to be giving them a mini Commodore 64. That's a bit of a blast from the past. Do you remember when we went to the Power Up conference?
Yeah.
And we actually got to play with some of those. So we're going to be giving them like which comes preloaded with some games. So that'd be fun, and I like that because I really do think that sometimes young people missed out from going through that generation of really old school computers where everything was something you could code yourself and make happen. There's too much just playing games that other people produce now, and it'd be nice. I love it with programs like Scratch and stuff. Minecraft to an element does a bit of this, but even more so things like Scratch where they can go out and create their own game and then play their own game that they've created. I think it's a really, really powerful thing. And Commodore 64 Minis is something that we're going to give them. And then for the adults, I think we're giving them the new GoPro, aren't we?
White GoPro 7.
Yes, it's just come out. So that'd be a bit of fun for them. So hopefully we'll see some really worthwhile winners of those.
Good afternoon again, Craig.
Hi.
So another quick one to finish off would be that you've mentioned some other programming paradigms in these chats we've had.
Yeah.
I thought it'd be useful to discuss those in a bit more detail. Maybe not give them a full episode, but
yeah. So we followed sequential through structured, through procedural, through modular, and ended up at probably the most famous paradigm, object-oriented.
And in general, just grouping things together as we go.
Yeah. So the next ones don't necessarily fit as easily into into that nice sequential flow.
They'd be more of a branch off at one point or another.
Probably the one that's closest actually evolves to an extent from the procedural programming paradigm. So I don't know if you remember, but I alluded to the idea that under procedural programming paradigm, we actually define two types of procedure, a subroutine and a function.
One returns a value, one does not.
Yes, that's right. So functions return values and subroutines just do some work.
Yeah.
And then return. What the functional paradigm does is, in the first instance, it says, well, actually, let's simplify that. And the easy way to simplify that is to think, actually, instead of saying that you can have a subroutine that returns without doing anything, doesn't return anything, why don't we just say that a subroutine is actually just a special form of function that returns nothing?
So in a procedural paradigm, obviously a subroutine can still fail, and I'm guessing it will return that error.
Yeah.
But is success and failure not a return value?
No, actually, I mean, that's a slightly different topic, but this is to do with, actually, it's a very different topic, but this is to do with how we exit program flow and how we unwind a stack. So it's how we work outside of our existing stack paradigm.
Okay.
Error handling is a very different thought process, and
but
it can be handled
not,
differently.
The idea of catching an error isn't...
It's not a return value, no. Okay. Absolutely not. You don't return an error or a value from a return thing. It sits outside of that. Yeah. Outside of the normal program flow.
The part that will be expecting return value doesn't get given the error, so it's...
No.
Okay.
Absolutely not. So no, this is slightly different. What the functional programming paradigm effectively says is that, to start with, is let's ignore subroutines and procedure functions. Everything's a function, right? If you've got something that doesn't return anything, then what it returns is nothing. Yeah. Therefore, it does return something. It returns nothing. It's a bit of a mind trick, right? It doesn't actually mean anything. It's just saying we always return something, but what we return might be nothing. That's okay, great. So now we've got rid of the
it's like if you give it a Christmas present.
Yeah.
If you don't get something that's different to someone telling you, I'm not getting you anything.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And this is only a thought experiment, so if you don't get it or you don't need to worry about it. It doesn't really matter. What we only need to really think about functions is the point. And then
just accept that subroutines have been absorbed into that.
Yes.
Entirely encompassing functions.
And then the next thing we can do is we can say, well, actually, a function should not. We can split functions into two types: pure and impure. Right. So a pure function will only deal with the data that is passed into it.
Okay.
Right. It will not have any external state outside of the data that's passed into it. And that's called a pure function. An impure function will be dependent on state. Yeah, that is external to the state that's passed into it. So object-oriented programming, by its definition, the methods in an object are generally impure functions
because it's acting on the other values on the object.
So it's not, you don't necessarily pass in data to the function. When you call it, it already has access to data within the object, and that object is state, and therefore they're mostly impure functions. In fact, by definition, a pure function in an object-oriented world shouldn't be declared on the object, or it should be what we call a static method. It should
There's
declare...
no benefit to putting it on an object because it's never going to access those.
Exactly. If it did, it'd be impure.
Yeah.
So we genuinely instance methods, as we call them, on objects.
Is it worth putting them on if it's very related?
No, because you can declare them as statics in most language, in C# and Java, for example. You declare them as a static, and so they're still related to the class. They're not related to the object.
Oh, okay, right. I'm with you. I'm following.
So they're related to the class, but not to the instance of the class, which is an object, right? So pure
when
functions,
you call it goes back to the class, the blueprint, and uses that one instead of the one that's related to the object itself.
Yes. So it's declaring the fact it doesn't need to access any of the fields on the object.
Yeah.
Right, and static classes you can even create a static class which never has an instance.
Yeah,
which is just really a module. But functions effectively, the first way we divide them up is between pure and impure, and the second way we might divide them up is between deterministic and non-deterministic. Right, it's just a fancy way of saying that a deterministic function for any given set of inputs will always have the same output. So, for example, addition is the deterministic function because 2 plus 2 is always equals 4.
Regardless of any other.
Yeah. A non-deterministic function is one where for any given set of inputs, you could get a different set of outputs.
Okay.
Now,
so if you ask the question, is the car on or off?
Yes.
It's going to be different depending on whether the car is actually on or off, even though you've asked the same question.
Yeah. Now, that leads to quite an interesting observation, which is...
Pure is deterministic, whereas impure can be either.
Well, here's the key, that pure... it's easy to start the other way around and say that an impure function, by definition, can't be deterministic.
Yeah.
But that's not actually true, right? We'll come to that. So, because impure functions can modify state but not change their answer. Right, so there's another side.
If it was a subroutine,
like for example, there could be a count to say how many times was this function run. So I could have an addition subject that but looks pure, but it's not pure because it has a counter to say how many times it ran. So it modifies external state as well. So we've got deterministic and we've got non-deterministic, and the two are very closely related, but not exactly the same as pure and impure. But that's a whole nother topic. Then we've got another one called aspect-oriented programming. There's actually one called subject-oriented programming, which is a precursor, but nobody really talked about anymore, so we'll just ignore that one. We'll go to aspect-oriented programming.
As if that was born fully formed.
Yeah, it wasn't, but it comes from subject-oriented programming. It's related, it's not the same. And the idea of aspect-oriented programs, I'm really simplifying and grossly cutting through all this, is the idea that you can identify areas in code where you want to do something. These are called point cuts. And then you can identify code that should run at those elements in those points of code. Right? And they're called cross-cutting concerns. Right? Now, a great example where this is useful is, let's say you want to log every time somebody enters or leaves a method. Right?
Any method or a specific one.
Yeah, then AOP would give you a mechanism for having a bit of code to run every time you enter a specific method or a set of methods, and a bit of code to run anytime you leave, like log what the name of the method is, what the time code was when it started, and then when you leave, the time code when it ended, so you can then see
that's instead of having to add a method at the beginning and end of every function.
Yes. So you could implement AOP by calling a method at the start of every and doing it manually, or you could have a tool to allow you to do that. So just in the same way that you can write object-oriented code in a language that doesn't necessarily support it, you can write it by writing boilerplate code, and I could go in and show you that, but it's hard to do it in a podcast. But in the same way, in aspect-oriented programming, we could just call something at the start of every method and at the end of every method. If that's where you wanted your point cuts to be. You might want the point cut in the middle of the method, or you might want the point cut when an error's thrown, or there's all kinds of areas where you might want to do point cuts. Some languages really support AOP in a lot of ways. It's great for things like logging. That's a really good example of it.
So it's similar to just adding a kind of listener.
Yes. Right. And then there's another famous programming paradigm that's even more ubiquitous than object-oriented programming. It's been around for a lot longer, it's more popular, and people don't not necessarily think it, and it's the set-based programming paradigm, as made most famous by SQL. Right? And this is a different one. This is where we actually consider how we can do operations on large sets of data. Right? So instead of doing operations on one bit at a time, we define something that works on the whole set and maps from one set to another set.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen one row at a time, it happens in bulk, effectively. I'm grossly simplifying, but that's effectively what happens there. And that introduces us to another way that we can divide our paradigms and the way we think. Okay? It's certainly the way we divide languages. And that's between two concepts called, and this is another paradigm, it's a way of thinking about them, imperative and declarative. Right? Often people will say SQL is a declarative programming language like HTML, and C# and JavaScript are imperative. That's just as wrong as using the other paradigms because there are declarative elements in C#, for example, famously templating strings or...
So what do imperative and declarative actually mean?
So imperative comes from Latin, and it generally means to issue a command.
Okay.
So imperative programming is the do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And this is a simple way of defining it. Declarative program, think of it as I declare what I want. Right? So a declarative program says, give me this. So HTML is probably the most infamous, this is declarative programming. When you write out a HTML page, you describe what you want the page to look like.
And it's up to the browser to try and implement that.
We call that rendering.
Yeah.
But how it renders that page is up to the browser. You don't tell it how to do it. It has to figure out, based on what you want, how to give you what you want. And declarative programming says, this is what I want, you go and wait for it to give me what. SQL, in many ways, is declarative.
Yeah.
When you say, what I want is, you've got all this data, I want you to give me this.
Oh, I want this value from the table.
Yeah, and it has to go figure out how to do that. You don't say how to do it, it goes and figures out how to do it. And that's declarative. Now, SQL is not purely declarative. People think it is, but for example, stored procedures are clearly not.
You can tell it exactly how to pull out something. There's
a whole bunch of imperative elements in SQL, but it's mostly declarative. And a simple single SQL statement is generally a declarative statement. In the same way, you can't say C# is purely imperative. It's not. There are plenty of examples of declarative in there. As by the way, in C# there are AOP features, aspect-oriented programming features. Attributes are a clear example of AOP. You might not think about it, but when you stick an attribute on a method, you're creating a point cut with a cross-cutting concern that can interpret how to use that attribute. And there are other elements of C# that are AOP as well, but that's the most famous. And there are
So what do you mean by
an
attribute?
Attributes, we use them in C# for marking methods and things like that. Or fields or properties. You can mark any element, a structural element.
So you just give it a little flag saying this is X.
Yeah, you normally put them in little square brackets.
Oh, I've seen the square brackets.
Yeah, and you put something around and they go right normally before the start of a method. And that's called an attribute. So without going into what attributes are in a lot of detail, they're actually an example of AOP. Well, speaking of robots, which is one of your favourite topics.
No ways.
And another one of our favourite topics on this podcast has been Mr. Musk, Elon Musk. We've talked about it a few times.
Yes.
So there was a report out earlier this week that statistically, it's another one of those reports come out saying statistically people who drive Tesla cars are far safer, less likely to be involved in accidents. And it's also been, the NHTSA also released a report this week saying that Tesla, the Model 3, their new one, has the lowest probability of injury in a crash. So not only is it one of the least likely cars for you to have a crash, so if you're on autopilot, you're less likely to have a crash. You're also far less likely to be injured in that crash if you're in a Model 3. So, and one of the main reasons for this is because we've moved away from engine blocks in the actual cars themselves. So it doesn't actually have an engine block in the front. It just has a big battery pack which they managed to put in the centre of gravity between the two axles.
Are these self-driving?
Yeah, these are, well, they're not entirely they are self-driving, but they're self-driving with supervision is what they currently do, isn't they? So you're supposed to monitor them and look at them whilst they're driving themselves.
What's the point in that?
Well, I think it's a stepping stone, isn't it? They are fully self-driving. They could drive themselves, but the moment it's to do with legislation and everything else, so they want the driver to still be alert. But in reality, whilst you let the Tesla Model 3 drive itself, you're far less likely to be in accidents than if you were driving it yourself.
I disagree.
Significant. Well,
those statistics are wrong.
It's just a statistic fact. I think it's important. This. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but a man is injured in a car crash once every 10 seconds in the US. He's getting really upset. Look at his face.
I don't get it. Say it again.